Welcome back to the Begin Purpose podcast, and welcome to the next episode in the Body Mass Identity, Weight Loss Identity track. In our last episode, we talked about what your weight came to mean, how somewhere along the way, for many of us, body size stopped being a measurement and became a symbol for control, worth, lovability, or proof of something we were afraid was true. We practiced the friend question, and we started putting daylight between the symbol and the self. Today, I want to continue that journey by meeting the voice that delivers all of those verdicts. This episode is called The Narrator You Didn't Choose, because those meanings we uncovered yesterday don't float around in silence. They are spoken, all day long, by an inner narrator you never hired and can't seem to fire. And today, you're going to learn the skill that everything else in this framework is built on, hearing that narrator in real time. So here's a question I want you to sit with for a second. When you looked in the mirror this morning, or when you avoided the mirror this morning, who was talking? Not out loud, inside. That voice that had something to say about your reflection, or your waistband, or the photo somebody tagged you in last night. Who is that? Where did they come from? And here's the bigger question. Did you ever actually hire that narrator? Or did they just show up one day and never leave? Because you cannot change a story you cannot hear. Every one of us carries an internal narrator, a voice, sometimes a whole committee of voices, that comments on our body throughout the day. Every mirror, every photo, every piece of clothing, every meal, every chair we size up before we sit down. For some people, that narrator is nearly silent. For others, it runs constantly, like a radio station you never chose and can't seem to turn off. In the Body Mass Identity framework, we call this domain body story awareness. How conscious you are of the story being told about your body, moment to moment, and where that story came from. And here's what surprises almost everyone. The loudest narrators are often the ones we've stopped hearing. Remember Wendell from yesterday? 58 years old. The man who, when asked what he said to himself in the mirror, answered, "I don't know, I guess nothing, I just don't really look." Yesterday we talked about the meaning hiding underneath that answer. But look at the mechanism itself for a second, because it matters. "I don't really look" wasn't the absence of a story. It was the story. Somewhere along the way, looking at his own body had become something to avoid. And that avoidance had become so automatic, it no longer registered as a choice at all. The story was, better not to look too closely. He'd just never said it out loud before. That's what low body story awareness usually looks like. Not a cruel story, an invisible one. The narrator is running, shaping decisions, influencing your mood, deciding which invitations you accept and which shirts you wear. And it's operating completely below the threshold of conscious notice. Now, why does this matter so much for you specifically, if you're in the middle of losing weight or living on the other side of major weight loss? Because this is the mechanism behind the identity gap we named at the start of this track. Your body got a renovation. Your narrator never got the memo. The voice that formed when you were 9 years old at a family dinner, or 13 in a gym class, or 26 in a doctor's office, that voice doesn't check the scale before it speaks. It just keeps reading from the old script. So you step off the scale 40, 60, 100 pounds lighter, and the narrator says the same sentence it said for 20 years. And you wonder why you don't feel free yet. You don't feel free because the narration hasn't changed. And here's the part I need you to hear. The narration doesn't change automatically with the weight. It changes with awareness, and then with practice. That's not bad news. That's the best news in this whole framework, because it means the thing that's been missing isn't more willpower or more weight loss. It's a skill, and skills can be learned. One more thing before we get practical, because I know somebody listening needs this said plainly. You did not choose this narrator. You didn't write its opening lines. Most of them were handed to you, by family, by classmates, by doctors, by a culture that had a lot of opinions about your body before you were old enough to have your own. So when you finally hear what that voice has been saying, do not add shame on top of it. Hearing an old story is not a character flaw, it's a doorway. Remember our language here. This is a map, not a mirror. A snapshot, not a sentence. Now you might be thinking, okay, Bo, so the goal is to make the narrator say nicer things, right? Eventually, maybe. But that is not step one, and I want to be really clear about why. Because this is where most people get ahead of themselves and then feel like they failed. You cannot reframe a story you cannot hear. You cannot offer a more dignified alternative to a sentence you don't even know you're repeating to yourself 40 times a day. Yesterday, you examined one comment after the fact, under good lighting. Today's skill is different, catching the narrator in the act, live, as it speaks. That's harder and more powerful. Awareness isn't the finish line, it's the doorway. Everything else in this work, the reframing tools, the daily action loop, the behavior experiments we'll get to in future episodes, every bit of it depends on this one foundational skill: noticing that the narrator exists and learning to hear what it's actually saying. And I'll be honest with you, the first few times you deliberately listen in, it can feel uncomfortable. If the story's been running on autopilot for decades, turning toward it feels unfamiliar. Some of what you hear may sting. That discomfort tends to ease, usually faster than people expect. But if it's there at first, that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're finally doing it at all. Let's talk about how this works in real life, while you're still mid-journey, while you're still adjusting doses, still learning new portions, still figuring out what your body is doing this month. Because here's the trap. Most people treat identity work as something you do after the weight loss is done. First, I'll change my body, then I'll work on how I feel about it. But you've seen how that goes. The body arrives at the destination, and the identity is still miles behind, reading old road signs. That's the gap. So we run these two tracks in parallel. Body work and identity work, side by side, every day. Not identity work instead of your nutrition plan, your medication, your medical care. Your doctor manages the biology. Your nutritionist manages the fuel. This is you managing the story. Nobody else can do that part. Practically, running the tracks in parallel looks like this. When you weigh in, at home or at the clinic, you practice hearing what the narrator says about the number, separately from the number itself. The scale says a fact. The narrator adds a verdict. We named that split yesterday. Today, you practice hearing it as it happens. 2 events, not one. When clothes fit differently, and they will, sometimes week to week, you notice the commentary. Old sizes, bold comparisons, old sentences. You don't have to argue with any of it yet. Just notice that the voice showed up and notice what it said. When someone compliments your changing body, and this one catches people off guard, listen for the narrator's rebuttal. For a lot of people, a compliment is followed within 2 seconds by an internal voice explaining why it doesn't count. That rebuttal is data, priceless data. None of this requires extra time. It requires extra attention laid right on top of the life you're already living. All right, here is your practice for today, and I've designed it to be small on purpose, because in this work, we believe in the smallest possible step, done consistently, over the grand gesture, done once. Today, you're going to become a court reporter for your own narrator. Open the Notes app on your phone or grab an index card. And for the rest of today, every time you catch your inner narrator commenting on your body, a mirror moment, a food moment, a clothing moment, a comparison moment, you write down just a word or two. What was said and what was happening when it was said. That's it. You're not fixing anything. You're not arguing with anything. You're not judging what you find, and you're especially not judging yourself for what you find. You are simply making the invisible visible. 2 ground rules. Rule 1, no editing. Write down what the voice actually said, even if it's harsh, even if you'd never say it to another human being. Especially then. We can't work with a cleaned-up transcript. Rule 2, no verdicts. At the end of the day, when you look back over your notes, you're only asking one gentle question. Is that what's been playing in the background all this time? That's the whole assignment. Awareness is the doorway, and today you're just walking up to it. If you catch 3 moments today, that's a win. If you catch 1, that's a win. And notice something. That win has absolutely nothing to do with the scale. That's what we call a non-weight win. Evidence of progress the scale is incapable of measuring. Log it. It counts. And if you're working with a coach, a nutritionist, or a doctor, bring your narrator notes to your next appointment. Seriously. Here's what my inner voice says around food and weigh-ins. is one of the most useful things you can ever put in front of a professional who's trying to help you. It turns a conversation about numbers into a conversation about you. So let's land this. You lost the weight, or you're losing it now, and the freedom you were promised hasn't fully shown up. Yesterday, you saw what the number came to mean. Today, I hope you can see who's been delivering those meanings. A narrator in there still reading from a script that was written years ago by people and moments that don't get a vote anymore. You didn't choose that narrator, but starting today, you can choose to hear it. And hearing it is the first act of taking the pen back. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Begin Purpose podcast. In our next episode, we go somewhere tender and important. Because for a lot of us, when we finally hear the narrator clearly, we notice its voice has a particular tone, one that doesn't just critique what we do, but attacks who we are. Next time we talk about the difference between shame and guilt, two words people use interchangeably that could not be more different. And I'll walk you through the shame to dignity reframe, one of the most important tools in this entire framework. If today's transcript stings a little, that episode is for you. Until then, do today's practice, one word at a time, one notice at a time. And remember, a failed method does not mean a failed person. You are not broken. This is Begin Purpose, and today is a good day to start hearing your own story. One quick note before you go. This podcast offers identity and self-reflection tools. It is not medical, psychological, or nutritional advice. Always work with your doctor, nutritionist, or licensed professional on decisions about your health, medications, or eating.